Hey guys, tonight we're heading into the heart of the Irish countryside, on a crisp October evening when the air smells like apples and wood smoke, and the light fades just a bit too early. You're stepping off the last creaky bus into a one-lane road lined with hedgerows and low stone walls. There's no traffic light, no corner store, just sheep on distant hills and the soft glimmer of windows lighting up one by one as the sun slips under the horizon. You're not here for a Halloween party, not the kind with fog machines and plastic cobwebs. No, this is the kind of place where Halloween didn't just get celebrated, it was born. Long before pumpkin spice lattes and store-bought costumes, this little pocket of the world marked October 31st with quiet rituals, deep symbolism, and traditions passed down through countless generations. And you've arrived just in time. Your host is a woman named Maeve. She meets you at the edge of the lane with a shawl over her shoulders and Wellington boots half-caked in mud. "It's good you're early," she says. "We've got to have everything done before the sun dips fully. That's how it's always been." The village, if you can call it that, is a small clutch of houses scattered around a gentle slope. At the centre is a stone cottage with a long thatched roof and a front garden that's more herbs than flowers. A black cat. Yes, of course, winds between your feet as you follow Maeve inside. The warmth hits immediately. A peat fire glows low in the hearth, casting orange light on rough white walls. Herbs hang in bundles from the ceiling. The smell is deep and earthy. Thyme, baked apples, something slightly smoky. You shrug off your coat and notice that, oddly, the fire isn't being fed. In fact, Maeve's letting it die down. She sees you look and smiles knowingly. "Don't worry," she says. "We'll light it again, but not yet." You settle into the evening with a mug of spiced tea, and that's when Maeve starts to explain. Around here, this night isn't just Halloween. It's Samhain, pronounced Samhain, a turning point in the old Celtic calendar, a hinge between the bright half and dark half of the year. It's not quite a celebration and not quite a farewell. It's both. And the first thing they do, every year, is let the fires die. All of them. "People think it's strange," Maeve says, "letting your fire go out on a cold night. But that's the rule. Always has been. You let the old year burn itself away." She points to the hearth. "We don't light a new one until the signal comes. From the hill. Apparently there's a bonfire being built at the edge of the fields. A great pile of logs, brush, and bone-dry twigs. And it won't be lit until everyone in the village is ready. Then they'll send one ember from that sacred fire to each home, and every hearth will begin anew. You realise this isn't a party. It's a reset button, a tradition older than almost any other. One fire goes out, a new one begins. Maeve hands you a small bundle of twigs wrapped with flax. "This is what you'll use," she says, "when it's time." There's something quietly humbling about it. You can't remember the last time a fire meant anything more than comfort or cooking. But here, it's a marker of time itself. You glance again at the dying embers in the hearth. No one adds wood. No one stirs the coals. It dims, fades, waits, and so do you. You're not sure what to do with yourself, now that the fire's nearly out and the house has grown dim. Maeve doesn't seem rushed. In fact, she moves slower now, almost ceremonially, placing wooden bowls on the windowsill, lighting a small beeswax candle, then pinching it out just as quickly. "That's for the fields," she murmurs. "They'll need light too later, but not now." You wander to the window. Outside, the fields are soaked in a bluish grey, neither day nor night. You spot other cottages like this one with soft yellow glows quickly dimming. You see shadows moving about, people preparing. No one is speaking loudly. It's a gentle hush across the valley, like the countryside is holding its breath. There's no trace of commercial Halloween here. No plastic skeletons, no inflatables, no blinking lights. Just small motions with deep meaning. Maeve steps out for a moment, and you follow. Outside, you catch a glimpse of the fire pile she mentioned. A low mound at the far edge of a sloping field, already surrounded by a few quiet figures in wool coats. Someone adjusts a stone circle around it. Another person carries what looks like dried sage or yarrow, bundling them in clusters. That's the central fire, Maeve whispers, always built in silence. The druids would have handled it once, but now we all just take turns. You ask about the timing. When exactly will it be lit? When the stars are fully out, but before frost settles. It's not an exact hour, you just know. As the evening deepens, Maeve tells you more about the old Celtic calendar. Samhain wasn't just a festival, it was the start of the new year, a sacred threshold. People believed that the boundary between seasons and even worlds grew thin. But unlike the tales you've heard elsewhere, Maeve focuses not on spirits or ghouls, but on nature, on the liminal space between summer and winter, when everything pauses before transforming. This was the end of the light half of the year, she says. The cattle were brought down from the hills, the last harvest was gathered, and then came the waiting time, the dream time of winter. You nod, and something clicks. Halloween wasn't born from fear. It was born from timing, from the rhythms of sun and soil. The celebration marked survival, preparation, reflection. It made sense of the fading light. You think about modern Halloween, how it rushes in with candy and fog machines, and how quickly it vanishes. This is different. Slow, layered, intentional. And then Maeve gestures toward the distant hill. A faint orange spark flickers. That's the sign, she says simply. You're handed a small iron lantern, rusted, heavy, and shaped like a curled acorn. Maeve lights the candle inside from her matchstick, then snuffs it just as quickly. Can't use this fire yet, she says. We'll relight it the proper way when we bring the flame back. You realise now that fire is not just fire here. It's meaning. It's memory. It's shared. Down the path, other villagers emerge from homes, each carrying a bundle like yours, or an unlit lantern, or simply walking together. The entire village is headed for the hill. As you step out into the gathering dusk, cool air on your cheeks, bundle in hand, your breath visible, you don't feel afraid. You feel included. Not in a party, not in a show, in a ritual, in something old. And that somehow is more powerful than fear ever could be. The hill isn't far, but the walk there feels timeless. You follow the curve of the path as others join quietly from every direction. An old man with a walking stick, two sisters whispering in Irish under knitted scarves, a child holding her mother's hand and looking up at the darkening sky. No one brings phones, no one brings noise, just bodies wrapped in wool, breath fogging the air, and that shared sense that something's about to begin. The sun is gone now, but the stars haven't quite taken over. That soft, uncertain hour, just before the sky goes indigo, is when you reach the circle. The firewood is stacked waist-high in a tight pyramid, surrounded by smooth stones worn pale from decades of this same ritual. Someone has dusted the stones with dried ash from last year's fire, apparently a way of anchoring the past into the present. Maeve nods toward a short man in a thick tweed coat. He's lighting a single taper from a flint spark. It's not the fastest method, but that's the point. Nothing about this is meant to be rushed. As the flame catches, the man holds it up. No announcement, no chant, just a raised hand in silence. Then, slowly, he lowers the taper into the kindling at the heart of the fire pile. A few seconds of stillness. Then the first thread of flame curls upward. It's beautiful. It crackles and climbs without fanfare. Dry twigs pop. Pine needles catch and spiral. The fire rises naturally, gradually, like it's remembering how to breathe. No one claps, no one cheers, but shoulders relax. People begin to smile. Maeve leans in and says, "This is the heart of Samhain, the new flame." One by one, people step forward with their bundles of twigs or peat. They catch the edge of the bonfire and cradle it carefully, bringing it back to their homes like carrying a secret, like lighting the future. You wait your turn. When it's yours, Maeve shows you how to hold the bundle low near the edge, until a small tongue of fire licks across the flax. She wraps it in a clay tile and nods. "Go on now, Let's get your hearth going." The walk back feels lighter. Lanterns flicker ahead and behind you as people return to their homes carrying this New Year's fire. There's something deeply human about it. This shared source of warmth. This ritual of beginning again. Back at the cottage, Maeve leads you to the hearth. She clears away the ashes of the old flame with slow, practiced hands, placing them gently into a metal bowl marked with a spiral. "We keep these," she says. "Never throw away the old year too fast." Then, using the new flame from the hill, she lights a small kindling pyramid you helped build earlier. It catches quickly, fresh and eager, unlike the slow fading glow you saw earlier. The room seems to change with it. Shadows dance higher on the walls, the temperature lifts, and something in your chest, something quiet, settles. This is warmth, but it's also meaning. You've helped carry a thread through time, and now Samhain has officially begun. With the new fire burning steady in the hearth, the cottage feels more alive. Not louder, not brighter, just more present, like the walls have exhaled and settled into their bones. Maeve sits in a low chair by the flame, knitting slowly, the needles tapping gently like a ticking clock. You sit nearby, warming your hands. "Most people don't know," she says, "that Halloween started here not as a celebration of fear, but of order." She gestures toward the flames. The fire told people what time of year it was, when to bring the animals in, when to store the grain, when to stop working the fields. Samhain was a signal that the old cycle had ended. The land would sleep, and we would too. You listen, surprised by how peaceful that sounds. In a world that never stops, where every season blurs into the next, there's something comforting about the idea of a boundary. A moment when the year folds in on itself and people say, "Enough." Maeve goes to a small cabinet near the hearth and pulls out a weathered wooden box. Inside are tiny slips of paper, each with a name and a year scrawled in faded pencil. "These are the years I've lit the fire myself," she says. "I've done it every Samhain since I was 12. You notice that the box is full, not stuffed but layered, a quiet archive of evenings just like this. She adds one more. "Tonight, you lit it." You smile, a little awkwardly, but also a little honoured. She places the new slip on top, closes the lid, and sets it back on the mantel, next to a small bowl of hazelnuts and an unlit beeswax candle. "That candle will stay dark until morning," she says. "It's a way of giving the night its time." As the fire crackles, she begins to tell you how the hill fire used to be much larger, lit by entire clans in open fields. People would bring cattle to pass between the flames, a practice called Bealten in the spring, and sometimes repeated at Samhain to protect the herd for the winter ahead. Even though no one brings cattle to this fire anymore, the spirit of the tradition remains. Every action tonight, the way the fire is lit, the silence around it, the sharing of a single flame, has roots so deep, they stretch past history into story. Maeve pulls a blanket over her knees and gazes into the flames. "They used to say that time thins on this night," she says softly, "that what was, and what is, sit a little closer together." You pause, half expecting a ghost story to follow, but none comes. Just the quiet breath of the fire, the hum of wind outside, and the gentle weight of history sitting beside you. It's not spooky, it's sacred. And maybe that's the part of Halloween that got lost. Before the tricks and costumes, before the haunted houses and pop-up stores, there was this. A hearth, a quiet fire, a shared flame to mark a shared threshold. The world outside continues to turn cold and dark, but here inside your small fire burns. Not just for light, not just for heat, but to say, "We were here, we remember, and we begin again." You wake early the next morning to the soft sound of stirring. Not alarm clocks or engines, just a broom sweeping gently over a stone floor, and the rattle of a kettle warming above the same fire you helped light hours ago. The sun isn't fully up yet. There's only a pale sliver of light sliding in through the cottage window, but the air's already crisp and bright with that unmistakable post-frost smell, earthy, clean, edged with cold, Maeve pours you a mug of barley tea and sets out slices of brown soda bread. She's already dressed, her grey hair tucked under a knitted cap, cheeks pink from stepping outside. "Come on," she says with a glint in her eye. "We've got something to do before the others get to it." You pull on boots and follow her out into the field, down a narrow trail behind the cottage. It winds between low hedges and frost-tipped ferns, past a small wooden gate and into what looks like a garden gone dormant. Beds of kale, leftover squash vines, and rows of dry herbs hanging limp in the morning chill. In the middle of it all stands a blackened iron cauldron, balanced on 3 stones. It's empty now, but Maeve drops a handful of dry leaves into the base: oak, ash, rosemary. She then adds a pinch of salt, a bit of cider, and a few breadcrumbs from last night's meal. "This is where we feed the fire again," she explains, "but not the hearth fire. This is for the land." It's a custom passed down in rural Ireland. Once the new fire is lit at Samhain, a small offering is made back to the earth. Not a sacrifice, not a superstition, just a thank you. Maeve strikes a match and lights the dry herbs, which curl into thin blue smoke. You both watch silently as it rises, vanishing into the cold morning air. You're not sure what the right reaction is should you close your eyes, speak a word. But Maeve only nods. That's enough. It's about the gesture. She tells you how this custom reflects the old agricultural cycle. Samhain wasn't just about lighting fires. It marked the final harvest, the end of the growing year. Nothing planted after this night would survive the winter. People once believed that the land itself needed to rest. So instead of forcing more from it, they gave something back, a bit of warmth, a trace of nourishment, even a whispered wish for spring. As you walk back toward the house, the frost begins to melt under your feet. You notice other gardens with their own little signs of thanks, bundles of herbs tied to fence posts, apples placed under trees, a splash of cider poured at the roots of an old oak. No one boasts about it. No one photographs it. It's just there, like a conversation between people and place that's been going on for centuries. Back at the cottage, the kitchen is brighter now. Maeve hangs the kettle and stirs oats into a bubbling pot. The hearth crackles softly. You feel grounded in a way you can't quite explain. Like you didn't just witness history, you stepped inside it. Breakfast is quiet, but not in a sleepy way. It's a kind of silence that feels earned. You and Maeve share a bowl of porridge, each spoonful topped with a bit of honey and crushed hazelnuts. Outside, the mist is beginning to lift, curling off the fields like steam from the land surface. Maeve sets down her spoon and nods toward the fire. "We'll be needing that for the next bit," she says. "Time to carry it on." You follow her into a small stone building next to the cottage. What might have been a shed once, but now serves a different purpose. Inside, the walls are lined with shelves, each holding tiny oil lamps, bundles of dried grasses and small clay dishes filled with wax. She picks up a shallow brass lamp, dips it into a jar of lard thickened with bay, and carefully sets a wick along the edge. Then, using a glowing twig from the hearth, she lights it. "This," she says, "is for the threshold." She walks back to the house and places the lamp just outside the front door, nestled into a shallow niche in the stone wall. Years ago, every house would do this on Samhain. You placed a light at the entrance, not to ward anything off, but to say, this home is tended, it remembers. It's not about fear, it's about acknowledgement, a quiet, visual promise that the people inside honour the turning of the year. You begin to see a theme here. These customs aren't performative, they're not flashy or loud. They're small, deliberate gestures that give shape to time, markers that say, we made it through one more cycle. We still belong here. Maeve tells you that in some parts of Ireland people would leave the lamp burning all night, especially if someone in the house had had a hard year, a lost harvest, a sick child. A long silence from a relative abroad. The light said, "We're still here," and if a neighbour passed by and saw the light, they'd pause. Not to knock or talk, but just to nod, even if no one saw them. That was the point. A shared ritual without words. After the threshold is lit, Maeve brings out a small wooden bowl filled with salt and ground oats. She sprinkles a pinch in each corner of the kitchen and one near the base of the fireplace. Not magic, she says, noticing your curious look. Just balance. Keeps the energy of the house settled. These old gestures, the lamp, the salt, the fire, they aren't about superstition. They're about stability. A structured rhythm to life. A way of saying, this is the edge of the old year. Let's cross it carefully. Before you arrived, Halloween might have felt chaotic. Loud costumes, jump scares, overstimulation. But here, it's the opposite. Every act is about intentional quiet. Every motion has meaning. And then Maeve says something that lingers. We can't control much this time of year. The dark comes early. The harvest is done. But we can light a fire, place a lamp, put out bread and salt. We can choose how we move into what's next. You sit a moment longer by the hearth, the brass lamp glowing just outside, and you realise this version of Halloween doesn't chase away fear. It replaces it, with rhythm, with gestures, with care. The sky's fully awake now, brushed with streaks of soft gold and pale blue. You step outside with Maeve, mug in hand, and notice how the village seems quieter than usual for daytime. Not empty, just gentle, like everyone's moving half a beat slower on purpose. Maeve leads you toward the edge of the village, where a dirt path curls down into a low meadow. We'll visit the crossroads next, she says simply. You don't ask why. At this point you've learned it's better to walk first and understand along the way. The grass is short and silvery with dew. Along the path you pass carved turnips perched on fence posts. Their hollowed eyes and flickering candles are a little eerie, yes, but not spooky. They're watchful, quiet sentinels, like lanterns made for travellers who might forget their way. Maeve smiles at one as you pass. That one's Columns. He always does 3 eyes instead of 2, you laugh. It's not the response you expected, but that's exactly the point. These carved roots aren't designed to scare anyone, not here. They were originally placed to light the way for those out late, whether human or animal. Over time, they took on faces, a little protection, a little playfulness, and a lot of personal flair. Pumpkins, you realise, came much later. It was these humble turnips that set the tradition, grown in rocky Irish soil, hard to carve, but part of every harvest. You reach the crossroads, a patch where 4 grassy lanes meet, ringed with flat stones and hedges. It doesn't look like much, but Maeve stops walking. Her tone softens. This is where decisions are made. In folk tradition, crossroads are symbolic places, neither here nor there, not belonging to one direction or the other, a meeting point of possibility. Long ago, villagers would gather here at Samhain to speak intentions for the new season. Not loudly, not ceremonially, just quiet wishes whispered into the cold air. Good health, strong calves, peace after a hard year. You notice small tokens placed in the grass, an apple, a strand of yarn, a smooth black pebble. Offerings, Maeve says, simple ones. She doesn't speak much more. Instead she steps forward, plucks a few wild rose hips from the hedge, and places them at the centre. You feel your pocket, unsure what to offer. A button? A note? A coin? Eventually you settle on a tiny folded paper napkin from breakfast, the only thing on you but something that was part of this morning. You smooth it out and leave it by the rose hips. It feels silly, and yet grounding. You sit on a flat rock nearby while Maeve stands quietly beside you. No one else is here, just wind moving through branches and the distant call of crows over the meadow. This place isn't marked on any map, Maeve finally says, but it's more real than most roads you'll travel. And you believe her. Because for all its simplicity, this crossroads feels like the heart of something, a gentle ceremony in an unremarkable field. And that, maybe, is what Samhain is best at, giving meaning to places that might otherwise be passed without pause. You linger at the crossroads a little longer, watching the breeze tease the leaves along the hedgerow. The morning stillness isn't heavy. It's calming, like a page just turned and no one's in a hurry to read the next one. Maeve pulls her shawl tighter and starts back up the path. You follow, quietly, as if leaving a sacred space. You don't talk about what you left there on the ground. You don't need to. On the way back to the village, you pass a group of children sitting in a circle near an old dry well, each holding something in their hands. Bits of ribbon, polished stones, snippets of paper. One of them holds up a twig and says, "This means I want to be brave this winter." Another nods solemnly as if that makes perfect sense. Maeve whispers, "Even the little ones know. Samhain isn't just about marking time, it's about giving shape to it." Back at the cottage, you find a small loaf of bread cooling on the sill. It's round, rustic, made with barley and oats, and dusted with flour in the shape of a spiral. "This," Maeve says, "is for the door." Not to eat, but to place, right outside, beside the threshold lamp you lit earlier. It's a tradition once practiced widely in rural homes. You leave a simple offering at the entrance, not for ghosts or spirits, but as a symbol of hospitality, of generosity, of readiness for the dark season ahead. It says, this home is warm, it gives freely, it's part of something larger than itself. Maeve explains that in the past, travellers might pass by on Samhain night, and seeing a bit of bread, a bowl of milk or a lit candle, they'd know the house was kind. It was also a reminder to those inside, share what you have. The harvest is over, but the winter is long. You never know who might need a little warmth. You take the loaf, still warm from the oven, and place it on a flat stone beside the door. It looks modest, almost too small to matter, but somehow it matters a lot. Later, Maeve shows you a collection of old door knockers in a wooden chest. Some are shaped like hands, others like twisted vines or crescent moons. People used to believe the shape of your knocker said something about your house, not just your wealth, your nature. She runs her fingers over a copper spiral. This one's my favourite. It means welcome and returning. You ask if they'll use it again. She smiles. Maybe. But sometimes leaving the door a little open says just as much. That evening, as the sun begins to dip again behind the same hill where the fire was lit, you sit by the threshold and notice how many other houses now have tiny loaves beside their steps. No signs, no explanations, just quiet symbols saying, we belong here. We care for others. We're ready for the dark, but not alone. And as the first stars return, you realise how many of these small customs, lighting a lamp, placing bread, leaving a wish at a crossroads, are not about what might happen. They're about how you choose to step into the unknown, with intention, with care, with a light at the door. The next morning brings a kind of hushed energy to the village. Like everyone knows, the festival is still unfolding, but it's now entered its quieter phase. Maeve tells you there's one last thing to help prepare. The Samhain table. You help her clear a wooden surface near the hearth, brushing away stray oat husks and folding a linen cloth over the top. She lays out a small worn cutting board, a bowl of apples, a dish of hazelnuts, and a tiny pitcher of cream. Then she pauses, hands on hips, and gives a satisfied nod. "This isn't for guests," she says. "It's for the year itself." She explains. Setting a table around Samhain isn't about feeding visitors. It's about recognising what the land gave you and returning the favour with respect. This table isn't symbolic, it's practical. It holds the last foods of the season, root vegetables, stored apples, dried herbs, nuts for winter, and grains from the final harvest. You begin slicing apples while Maeve crumbles brown bread into neat pieces and drizzles them with honey. She adds a handful of roasted turnips, a sprig of rosemary, and, finally, a clay cup of warmed milk. Each item placed has meaning, not superstitious meaning, seasonal meaning. This is the time of year when every item has weight. Nothing is wasted, and nothing arrives without a story. You ask about the hazelnuts, and Maeve chuckles. Those are for wisdom. In old stories, they fall into the river, get eaten by a fish, and whoever eats the fish becomes the wisest person alive. You hold one up, eyeing it with exaggerated reverence. "So, do I eat one or toss it in a river?" She grins. "Depends on how wise you want to be." Once the table is set, she lights a beeswax candle and places it in the centre. It's not bright, not meant to light the room, Just a soft, steady flicker that draws your eyes to the food in front of you. And then she does something unexpected. She sits down across from you. Not to eat, not to talk, just to sit. And you follow her lead. No one says grace. No one declares anything. The two of you simply sit in the presence of the Samhain table, the final fruits of the growing year laid out in their humble glory. The candle burns low. Outside, wind rattles the ivy on the walls. Inside, the fire murmurs. And for the first time in a long while, you're not thinking about what's next. You're just here. It's strange how powerful that can feel. Maeve finally speaks. When I was young, I thought this table was boring. Why not make a feast, I'd ask. But my gran would say, this is the feast. The fact that we have anything to place here at all. You look at the table again, apples, bread, herbs, milk, and realise it's not about abundance. It's about acknowledgement, about presence, and about ending the year with both hands open. After some time at the Samhain table, Maeve rises, careful not to blow out the candle as she moves past it. You follow her to the back door, where the light has shifted again, the low, golden kind that only shows up in late autumn, when the sun hovers at strange angles and makes everything look like it's been lightly toasted. She picks up a shallow wooden tray from the shelf and begins placing a few pieces from the table onto it. Half an apple slice, a piece of bread, a pinch of hazelnut and a drop of cream. Then she gestures for you to take it. Let's walk, she says. This part is best done in stillness. The tray in your hands feels surprisingly weighty, not from its contents, but from the meaning behind them. Maeve leads you along a narrow hedged path that curves through fields with tall dry grass and finally stops at a small stone wall overlooking an orchard gone bare. This is where we leave it, she says, nodding to a flat stone at the wall's base. Not for someone, not for something, just for the season. She doesn't explain much beyond that, and you find you don't need her to. You kneel and set the tray down carefully. The wind lifts the edge of the linen napkin beneath it, then lets it fall. The cream shifts in its cup, and that's it. No prayer, no chant, just offering. In ancient times, Maeve explains as you walk back, people believed this ritual helped close the harvest. By giving back a portion of the final yield, they acknowledged their role in a system much larger than themselves. It wasn't about guilt. It wasn't about superstition. It was about respect. They always say you shouldn't keep everything for yourself, Maeve muses, that the land doesn't like greed. This is how we show we remember that. Back at the cottage, you notice something has subtly shifted. The table remains set, but the bread has been moved to the kitchen, the milk back in its jug. The candle still flickers, but lower now, more relaxed. Maeve hums as she tidies. Nothing in a rush, nothing wasted. Crumbs go to the birds, bread crusts to a small tin by the door for the neighbours' chickens. Even the apple cores are destined for compost. You sit again by the fire, warmed now not just by flame, but by the slow rhythm of things done deliberately. This Samhain meal, the table, the tray, the offering, hasn't been dramatic or ceremonial, but somehow it's changed your sense of time. You're no longer racing toward the next thing. You're standing still in a moment, letting it stretch. It's strange how powerful quiet can be when it's shared. Later that evening, Maeve places a final item on the mantel, a small bundle of oats tied with red thread. You ask what it's for. For luck, she says, and for mice. They'll find it eventually and they'll be fed too, can't forget them. You smile, because that's what Samhain seems to be underneath it all. Not a night of horror, but a night of not forgetting. Not forgetting the land, not forgetting the rhythm, not forgetting that we belong to something older and slower than we usually remember. You pour another mug of tea and watch the candle flicker beside the empty plate where the apple once sat. No ghosts, no ghouls, just memory made visible. As twilight rolls in again, earlier now with the clock drifting back into its cold season rhythm, you notice Maeve preparing something by the hearth. Not food, not firewood, a pile of old cloth scraps, feathers, bits of fur, bark, dried moss, and a tangled mess of twine. She glances over her shoulder. Ready to make your mask? You blink. My what? Your Samhain disguise, she says, as if it's the most obvious thing in the world. No one goes out barefaced tonight. She sits cross-legged on the floor and gestures for you to join her. We don't dress up for fright. We do it to confuse the year. You pick up a piece of thick burlap. It smells faintly of hay and smoke. Maeve hands you a pair of old shears. Cut 2 holes. They don't have to be even. As you begin to work, she explains. In older times, people would wear masks or old clothes turned inside out on Samhain night, not to scare anyone, but to hide themselves from misfortune. If the year's ending, she says, and something ill-fated is wandering around, best not let it recognise you. Best to blur the line a bit. You pause with your scissors mid-air. So it's like camouflage for bad luck. Maeve grins. Exactly. You're not dressing up to become something else. You're dressing down to pass unnoticed. She picks up a long, gnarled feather and tucks it into her half-finished mask. It looks more bird than person. Yours, on the other hand, is shaping up to look like a startled potato, but she assures you that's part of the charm. Ugly is safer than clever, she says, tying twine around the top. Pretty things stand out. The year sees them and clings. We want to slip past the old year without it holding on. You begin to understand. This tradition isn't about transformation. It's about protection through absurdity. In the past, people believed that dressing strangely at thresholds, between seasons, between years, gave them a kind of freedom. It allowed them to step outside their usual identity, to become unnoticeable to trouble, or even to luck, which can sometimes be just as dangerous if it comes too fast. Maeve's voice drops softer. We used to go door to door in these things, not for sweets, but for mischief. We'd throw straw in the chimney or sing a rhyme off-key until someone gave us a bit of oatcake to hush us up. You laugh. So, basically old-school trick-or-treat, she nods. Without the plastic and sugar, yes. And only once the fire was lit, the bread was out, and the light was placed. By now your mask is a strange patchwork of dried leaves, a button, and some unravelled red thread. It's slightly lopsided and vaguely alarming. Perfect. Maeve ties it onto your face and steps back to admire her work. There, she says, you're ready for the end of the year. And maybe you are, because as the sky goes dark again and the fire flickers lower, you feel lighter, not like a new person, but like an old one stepping sideways, half seen, half spared, and fully part of something older than memory. You keep the mask on longer than you expect. At first it feels silly, bits of moss itching your cheek, the eye holes slightly crooked, but then something settles, a kind of quiet freedom. Behind the mask you're not expected to smile, or talk, or even be fully present. You can simply drift. Maeve, now sporting her own absurd disguise, a floppy burlap hood with 2 uneven antlers made from old broom handles, leads you outside. The village looks different under evening second arrival. Not eerie, just softened, muted by low clouds and the hush of firelight behind windows. Here and there you spot other figures moving about, neighbours in strange costumes of their own. One has a bird beak made from painted bark. Another has wrapped their head in wool and pinned leaves like eyebrows. No one's trying to be frightening. They're trying to be unreadable. Maeve leans in, voice low. There's an old phrase, better to be laughed at by neighbours than followed by the wind. You don't ask what that means. You just tuck it away, like everything else. As you walk, you notice how the custom unspools gently across the village. A family passes by singing a nonsense song. 2 children, entirely hidden under a patchwork blanket, walk together like a 2-headed sheep. One older man is simply wearing his coat backwards and a sock on his head. He waves. No tricks, no treats, just movement. Mischief. Yes, but not the sharp kind. More like a ritual of gentle reversal. An inside-out night. Maeve explains that years ago this was the only night people could step out of their roles. Servants might play at being masters. Children mock the village elders. Women wear the men's coats and clomp in their boots. The point wasn't rebellion. It was release. A ritual inversion before the year reset, and it always ended with laughter. It's like shaking your limbs before sleep, Maeve says. You unstick the old year from your joints. The two of you stop near the same crossroads as before. Others are gathered now, masks on, walking slow circles around the centre stone. Some hold lanterns. Some carry baskets with nothing in them. It looks like a parade with no audience. One woman stumbles on purpose, drops her empty basket and shouts in mock horror, "The year's run off with my onions!" Everyone chuckles, not belly laughs, but that quiet warmth that only comes when people are completely comfortable with one another. You're invited to join the walk, and so you do, mask on, boots crunching grass, following others as they loop and wander, like a dance that never needed choreography. This isn't a performance, it's a shedding. One lap for tiredness, one lap for anger, one lap for disappointment. Letting it go, all of it, by walking slightly ridiculous in the twilight. You feel strange and safe at the same time, like the old year can't see you, not with this bark on your brow and moss in your collar. Maeve nudges you as you pass the centre stone. That mask suits you. You respond with a low grumble and an exaggerated limp. She snorts, and just like that, the whole year becomes lighter, not erased, but laughed at, just enough to let it go. You wake to the smell of something sweet and faintly spiced, like warm fruit tucked under pastry and a hint of toasted flour. It's still early. The fire in the hearth has settled into that gentle crackle you now recognise as the cottage's heartbeat. Maeve is already bustling in the kitchen, her hands dusted with flour, sleeves rolled up past the elbows. On the table sits a round loaf, darker than the soda bread from yesterday, speckled with raisins and something else. It smells festive, quietly confident, like it knows it's the centrepiece. That, Maeve says with a proud nod, is barmbrack. You're going to want a slice of this one. You sit, still groggy but intrigued. The loaf looks unassuming, but you've learned not to underestimate anything in this house. Maeve cuts you a generous wedge and hands over a plate, but she pauses before you bite. Careful where you chew, there's something hidden inside. You freeze, she laughs. Not dangerous, just symbolic. As she explains, barmbrack is no ordinary fruit bread. It's a fortune cake, baked at Samhain for generations, and within it small tokens are hidden, each meaning something about the year ahead. A ring, she says, means love or marriage. A coin brings money. A bean might mean hardship. And a rag, she smiles. Well, you might want to hope you don't get the rag. You lift your slice carefully, chewing slowly, half dreading the crunch of something unexpected. But there's nothing yet. Just raisins, a soft warmth, a little citrus maybe. Maeve bites into her piece and suddenly pauses. She fishes something out and holds it up with mock triumph. A tiny brass thimble. Oh, that again, she sighs. Looks like another year of hard work. The tradition is half playful, half serious. No one truly believes their fate hangs on a bite of bread. But it's more than just a party trick. It's a way of inviting the unknown, of acknowledging the randomness in what's to come, and laughing gently in its direction. You take another bite, and there it is. A soft clink against your teeth. You reach in and pull out a coin. Maeve's eyes twinkle. Well then, fortune favours the foolish this year. She places your coin on the mantel beside a few others from years past. Some keep theirs, some return it to the batter next year, pass it on. You set yours down next to the thimble. You're not quite ready to carry it just yet. As more neighbours arrive throughout the morning, carrying baskets, loaves of their own, or just a thermos of cider, the kitchen fills with the smell of barmbrack and quiet conversation. Everyone checks their slice. Everyone reacts with a chuckle or a shrug. One man gets the ring and blushes. It's not legally binding, someone teases. It's warm, it's close, and it feels ancient, even though no one treats it like a museum piece. Because this isn't a reenactment. It's not performance. It's what people have done every Samhain, for as long as they can remember. Sit together, share a slice, and see what the bread has to say. The kitchen hums with the kind of gentle busyness that only comes from long familiarity. People passing bowls without asking, refilling mugs without prompting, laughing without trying too hard. Maeve slips more slices of barmbrack into waiting hands, and the plate of coins, rings, rags and beans on the mantel grows by the hour. Someone jokes that they got the rag 3 years in a row and still had their best harvest last spring. "It's not prophecy," Maeve says with a smirk. "It's personality." She explains that in older times, entire families would sit around one barmbrack, cutting it carefully so everyone received a slice, and the placement of the token was watched like a hawk. Some would even rig the bread, hiding the coin in a specific spot to give a young girl hope for marriage, or steer the rag toward an uncle known for being a bit too proud. It was storytelling disguised as dessert, she says, a way of saying things we wouldn't dare out loud. You sip warm cider and realise how different this is from the sugary chaos of Halloween you knew before. Here, even dessert carries the rhythm of the year. It isn't about indulgence, it's about foresight in small bites. One of the older women at the table pulls out a thin envelope and opens it to reveal a series of tiny fabric scraps stitched with names and dates. Each one came from a barmbrack over the years, tokens sewn into cloth-like memories. She's been keeping them since 1971. "They help me remember who was here," she says softly, "and which years were generous, and which years asked for more patience. It's a kind of record-keeping you've never considered. A history of fortune told through crumbs and cloth, passed from generation to generation without a single photo or file." Maeve leans over. "We don't always need to document everything to remember it. Sometimes the taste is enough." Later, after the last guest leaves, you help clear the table. Maeve wraps a final slice in wax paper and tucks it into the cupboard. "For New Year's," she says. "Some folks eat it then, see if the meaning changes." You can't help but smile. "What happens if someone finds 2 tokens in one slice?" "Oh," Maeve says, pausing with a sly grin. "Then you've got choices to make." As the kitchen settles back into calm, you realise how deeply these customs have rooted themselves, not as rules, but as gentle frameworks for understanding change. The tokens aren't spells, the bread isn't a prophecy, but the act of slicing into something uncertain, together, laughing or pausing or pondering, that's the real ritual. Maeve sets the now empty platter aside and nods at the coin you found. "Carry it or leave it," she says, "but either way let it remind you. You're not walking into the next season blind, you've marked it." And as you sit back by the fire, watching the candle flicker low, the taste of sweet bread still lingering, you feel it. You've been invited into the year ahead, with food, with laughter, and with the strange, comforting magic of a coin in cake. The afternoon slips by in that soft golden hush particular to late autumn, when the light seems to fall sideways and every sound feels padded. After the warmth of the kitchen, Maeve leads you out again, past the garden gate, past the hill where the Samhain fire still smoulders gently at its core. She's carrying a small basket this time, filled with apples, strings and 2 curious objects, a silver mirror no bigger than your palm, and a basin made of glazed black clay. "We're heading to the stones," she says simply. You don't ask which stones. At this point you've learned there's always a place, and it always reveals itself when you arrive. You walk through brambles and past wind-twisted trees until the path opens into a clearing you hadn't seen before, a low ring of ancient standing stones nestled in the grass like forgotten sentinels. Some are barely 2 feet tall, others rise to your shoulders. All are weathered with time and covered in fine moss, but their arrangement is unmistakably intentional. Maeve gestures to the basin. "Fill that with water from the spring over there." You spot a small trickle of water seeping from a cleft in the rocks. Cold, clean, and clear. You fill the bowl and carry it back carefully, trying not to slosh. She sets it inside the ring of stones and places the mirror beside it. "This is what they used to do on Samhain," she says. "Not to summon anything, just a glimpse." You look puzzled, and Maeve smiles. People would come here to look, not into the future exactly, more like the shape of things to come, the seeds of a path. She hands you an apple already strung with twine. Hang it on the tree behind you, pick one stone, sit with the bowl, then just See what you see. You follow her instructions, feeling half skeptical, half curious. You choose a smooth stone and settle in cross-legged. The breeze tugs your sleeves. The trees shift softly overhead. You lean over the basin. At first, it's just your reflection, then clouds, then the branches above. But after a while, something odd happens. Not supernatural, not dramatic. Just a shift in how you're looking. You don't see yourself. You see the year behind you, in shapes and sensations. The sound of doors closing, the touch of rain on wool, a hard conversation, a moment of unexpected kindness. All the things that never made it into photos. You look at the mirror next. It shows only what's already there, but slightly different. Light bending, angles reframed. And that's the trick of it, you think. It's not about predicting the future. It's about giving your thoughts space to breathe in silence, in stone, in water. You sit back. The apple hanging on the tree behind you spins once in the breeze and settles. Maeve's voice is quiet when she speaks. We didn't need crystal balls, just a still moment, and the patience to watch. It strikes you suddenly how rarely you've had moments like this. Not distracted, not multitasking, just sitting with the year. And here, in a circle of stones that have stood longer than memory, it feels like exactly the right thing to do. You stay in the circle a little longer, letting your gaze wander from the basin to the trees and back again. The shadows have grown longer now, stretching across the grass like threads being pulled tight. Your apple, one of several now swaying from nearby branches, twists in the wind, then stills again. Maeve steps gently over the outermost stone and joins you inside the ring, carrying 2 more apples and a soft woolen cloth. She sits beside you, her voice low, the tone more reverent than usual. Long before mirrors, they'd use water. Lakes, wells, puddles even. Anything that could hold the sky. She smiles faintly. People don't give still water enough credit. It reflects what's right in front of you, but never in the way you expect. You watch her place an apple in the bowl, not floating it, just resting it there, half submerged. The skin glows golden in the water, warped slightly by the ripple. Samhain was never just about remembering the past, she says. It was also the only time you were allowed to peek forward. Just a little. You ask if people really believed they could see their future in the water. Sometimes. But mostly they were just giving themselves permission to ask. That's the part most of us forget. She invites you to ask something of the year ahead. Not aloud, not even in words. Just a quiet wondering. A tug of curiosity. A question shaped in breath alone. You stare into the bowl. You don't see visions, no flashing images. Just your reflection slowly unwinding, the water bending you into unfamiliar shapes. It's oddly comforting, like the year ahead doesn't need to be solved, just noticed, just entered slowly. As the light shifts again, Maeve begins tying red string around the tree branches where the apples hang, a tradition she says her grandmother taught her, one that predates stories about wishes. It's not about making something happen, she explains. It's about marking the moment you hoped for it. That way, if it comes, you'll know it didn't arrive by accident. You help her with the last string. There are no prayers, no instructions. Just knots tied with fingers that have made the same loops every October for 50 years. You sit in silence one last time, side by side in the stone ring, watching the wind catch the hanging apples. No one's really looking for answers here. They're looking for space. A pause in the rush of seasons, a quiet acknowledgement that the year to come will ask something of you, and you're choosing to meet it halfway. Eventually Maeve stands and brushes the dirt from her skirt. Time to let the place rest. You step out of the circle, back onto the path, leaving the apples, the strings, the bowl and the mirror behind. Not abandoned, not finished, just offered. As you walk back toward the cottage, you feel different. Not like someone who's predicted the future, but like someone who's opened a small door in their thoughts and left it ajar. And behind you, the standing stones continue their watch. Silent. Still. Enough. By the time you return to the cottage, the sky's leaning hard into evening again. That deep navy hue has returned, brushed with the last hints of pink, and the air carries a sharpness that catches in your throat. The fire is steady in the hearth, and the candle by the Samain table is burned low, leaving a lace of wax that's spilled down its holder like frost. Maeve meets you at the door, carrying 2 long-handled lanterns. She hands you one without a word. "We'll go slow," she says. "This is the old road. You don't rush the old road." You raise an eyebrow, but she's already walking. The road she speaks of isn't on any map. It's a thin, winding path that cuts between hedgerows and crosses a narrow stream by way of a fallen log. It doesn't feel abandoned exactly, but it's clearly not used often. The grass is too high, the fence posts too crooked. As you walk, Maeve explains, in villages like this, there's always an old road, the one people used before pavement, before carts, the one that led between farms, or to the next parish, or nowhere at all. These roads weren't just physical routes, they were rhythms of movement, paths worn by feet that carried bread, gossip, or borrowed tools, and on Samain some believed walking them slowly, silently, was a way to reflect on where you'd been and where you might be headed. It's like shaking dust from your boots before stepping into the next year, Maeve says. The lantern in your hand casts a circle of light barely wider than your shoulders. Everything else, the brambles, the open fields, the sky, is lost to shadow. You're not afraid, but you're alert. You can hear your own breathing, the crack of twigs beneath your feet. Somewhere nearby, an owl calls once. At a bend in the road, Maeve stops. She pulls a small flat stone from her coat pocket and places it gently on a low stump at the roadside. You watch in silence. She offers no explanation, and you don't press for one. A few steps later, you find yourself reaching into your own coat. You don't know what you're looking for, but your hand closes around a coin, the one from the barmbrack. You hesitate, then place it at the base of a tree nestled into a patch of moss. A soft gesture, a marking of passage. Maeve glances back and sees, but says nothing, just gives a small nod. You realise this is the entire purpose of the old road walk, to move slowly through the edges of things and leave behind the moments worth remembering, quietly, anonymously, with nothing asked in return. And something about that makes them stick. Farther along you spot other subtle signs, a bit of red string tied to a branch, a single candle stub in the crook of a stone wall, the unmistakable scent of clove lingering where someone's passed recently. Each is a small flag waving to no one and to everyone. You continue walking, not seeking, not escaping, just letting your steps land one at a time. Because some roads aren't meant to take you anywhere, they're meant to bring you through. You keep walking the old road, and soon it becomes less of a path and more of a suggestion. The hedgerows thicken, brambles tug at your boots, but the lantern's glow keeps enough of the dark at bay, and Maeve never once falters in her step. She stops occasionally, not to speak, not to point anything out, just to pause, to let the moment catch up. Once she stoops and picks up a leaf, another time she gently writes a toppled stone on a crumbling wall. Each movement feels quiet and meaningful. Not ceremonial exactly, but full of attention, as though simply noticing is its own kind of offering. You ask if the old road has a destination. Maeve smiles. Sometimes, but mostly it has memory. She tells you how, long ago, these paths were layered with stories, not written, not recorded, just passed on by repetition. Here's where the traveller rested. Here's where they argued. Here's where someone left a note in the hedgerow and never came back for the answer. You realise now that the walk isn't about where you're going. It's about letting the walk show you what you've carried here. Thoughts surface you didn't expect. Small things, forgotten promises, conversations unfinished. You let them pass like wind through branches, not trying to hold them, just letting them be acknowledged. Maeve slows again and gestures to a low opening in the hedge, a gap barely shoulder wide. "Shortcut home," she says, but it only works if you remember to say thank you. You're not sure if she's joking. Still, As you pass through the narrow gap, you murmur a soft "thank you," almost instinctively. The air feels cooler on the other side, and the cottage lights ahead look warmer than before, their glow almost golden against the deepening blue. You return to the door with the same lantern you left with, its oil now low, its glass warm to the touch. You hang it gently on the post, and Maeve adds a few drops of oil, readying it for tomorrow. Inside, the fire has settled into embers. The barmbrack is covered. The candle at the Samain table is now fully melted, a small pool of wax catching the flame's last breath. Maeve sets a kettle over the hearth and eases into her chair. She doesn't speak for a long time, neither do you, because the silence now feels earned, like something that belongs at the end of a road. You think back on the walk, not because anything remarkable happened, but because everything unremarkable was allowed to breathe. There were no answers, no omens, just a slow unfurling of time, one lantern length at a time, and that perhaps is the real meaning of this night. Not ghosts, not tricks, not fear, but the gentle act of noticing where you've been, what you've carried, and what you're finally ready to set down. You exhale. The fire pops once. The new year has already begun. You wake to frost. Not the soft dew frost of a passing chill, but a proper Samhain frost, the kind that silvers the thatch roof, edges every leaf in lace, and makes the morning smell like stillness. The kind of frost that says, "It's done now. The wheel has turned." Maeve is already outside, boots crunching in the garden. You find her bending over a low wooden crate sorting apples. Each one is dull with cold but firm. She gestures to another crate nearby and says, "Sort out the bruised ones, would you? We'll be using them for the old games." You sit beside her, your fingers quickly numbing. "Old games?" She grins. "The kind we used before anyone had a deck of cards or a screen to stare at." Back inside, she sets a wide copper basin on the floor and begins to fill it with water from the rain barrel outside. It's icy cold. Your hands flinch just looking at it. Maeve drops the first apple in. It bobs gently. "Right," she says, brushing her hands. "You ever try snapping for apples?" You shake your head. She demonstrates, hands behind her back, face hovering over the basin. She lunges forward and tries to catch the floating apple with her teeth. She comes up empty and soaked. Water drips from her nose as she laughs. Harder than it looks. You try. It's ridiculous. You nearly knock the basin over, come up sputtering, and only manage to nudge the apple out of the reach with your nose. But the laughter warms the room better than the fire. Maeve explains how apple snapping, also called ducking for apples, was once a courtship game. Young people would try to grab the apple with their teeth, and whoever succeeded first was said to marry soon. Another version: you'd peel the apple in one long ribbon, toss it over your shoulder, and see what letter it formed on the floor. Supposedly the first initial of your true love. You give it a try. Your peel breaks halfway through and forms something like the letter E, or maybe a snake. Maeve shrugs. Might be love, might be trouble. There's another game she wants to try, nut pairing. She places 2 hazelnuts on the hearthstone, one marked with soot, the other plain. If they jump toward each other when the fire heats them, she says, the people they represent are a match. If they leap apart... She doesn't finish the sentence. You both crouch and watch the nuts. They sit still for a moment. Then one pops upward and rolls toward the back wall. The other stays right where it was. Maeve chuckles. Typical. These games aren't about accuracy. They're about connection. Laughter. A way to invite the future to speak, even if only in riddles. You imagine past generations doing the same, crouched around fires, apple juice on their cheeks, giggling over broken peels and runaway hazelnuts. These aren't scary traditions. They're social ones, relational, rooted not in fear, but in hope, wrapped in silliness. And suddenly, that seems like a pretty good way to start a new year. The games continue, but in that meandering, timeless way that things do when no one's keeping score. Maeve brings out an old cloth bag filled with smooth pebbles, each one painted faintly with a symbol. A sun, a sheaf of wheat, A wave, a star, a boot, a tiny stick figure with arms raised. Another old favourite, she says. Pull 3, see what kind of year you'll have. You reach in, the stones cool and clinking softly, and draw out a boot, a wave, and the wheat. Maeve raises her eyebrows. Looks like you'll be doing some travelling, or slipping in puddles. Hard to say, but you'll land on your feet with a full pantry. She's teasing, of course, but there's something oddly comforting about the randomness. A miniature story built from symbols, like letting the year tell you what it wants. Maeve draws her own stones. A star, the figure with raised arms, and a blank one. She studies them for a moment, then places them back in the bag. I'll take that as, keep going, keep wondering, and don't overthink it. It strikes you then that these games, these simple, silly traditions, aren't about predicting anything. They're about permission. Permission to wonder, permission to hope, and perhaps most of all, permission to be playful, even in the dark season. By mid-afternoon, the table is a mess of apple peels, damp sleeves, cracked nutshells, and the echo of laughter. Maeve carefully folds the cloth bag and sets it aside for next year. We only play these now, she says, because someone remembered them last year, and the year before that. You help clear the floor, returning the pebbles to the pouch and drying out the copper basin. The sun is dipping again, lower each day now, as the season leans fully into winter. Before dinner, Maeve sets one last small challenge. Stand with your back to the door, she says, handing you a spoon. You glance at the spoon, confused. And toss it over your shoulder, she adds. If it lands facing up, your year will be generous. Downward? She shrugs. Maybe less so, or maybe just quiet. You toss. It clatters on the floor and lands. Upward. Not perfectly. A bit lopsided, but clearly cupped toward the sky. Maeve claps once. There, you'll be fine. You grin. And that's the essence of it, isn't it? You'll be fine. Not promised gold or romance or fame, just fine. And that's enough. That evening you help bake oatcakes and listen to a neighbour play the tin whistle by the fire. Someone brings a bottle of last year's cider, and you sit back with a full mug, a warm plate, and a mind pleasantly loosened by stories and laughter. No fear, no frights, no ghosts hiding in shadows, just apple skins curling into shapes, cracked nuts on the hearth, and the soft glow of a year leaning forward. Because when the dark half of the year begins, you don't meet it with dread. You meet it with play, with rituals, with your hands wet from bobbing apples and your heart light from someone else's terrible fortune-telling rhyme, and in that moment, surrounded by steam and music and the hum of good company, you know, Samhain isn't a night to be afraid of, it's a night to belong to. The next morning is grey, not gloomy, but the kind of soft grey that flattens shadows and makes sound feel closer. There's a thin mist clinging to the hedgerows, and dew hangs heavy on every blade of grass. You step outside with a mug of warm barley tea, and the stillness feels earned, like the village has exhaled. Maeve is in the barn, already halfway through her morning chores. You offer to help, and she waves you toward the shed by the old apple tree. You can bring out the ledger. You pause. The what? She grins. You'll see. Inside the shed is a battered wooden chest with a clasp made from twisted wire. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, is a thick book, hand-bound, pages yellowed at the edges, the cover marked with a faint spiral symbol. This, Maeve says, is the Samhain ledger. You carry it reverently back to the cottage. It feels heavier than it should, not in weight, but in meaning. When you set it on the table and open the cover, you see pages and pages of neat, looping handwriting. The entries are dated, one per year, 1 page each. They aren't long, no essays, no declarations, just small notes about the harvest, the fire, who came to visit, what the year felt like, a list of who drew which token from the barmbrack, a brief mention of who sang what at the fire. Maeve flips to the most recent page. This is where we write what we want to remember. You ask if it's just for her family. It was, she says, but it's never been private. She pulls out a pen and gestures to the empty half of the newest page. Go on, add what stuck with you. You hesitate. What did stick? the taste of bread, the moment your coin hit the floor, that breath you took in the circle of stones, the laugh from the old man in the backward coat, the awkward but sincere toss of the spoon. Eventually you write, First Samhain. The fire was shared. The coin landed heads up. The apple got away. I walked the old road and didn't hurry. It's not elegant. But Maeve reads it and nods. That's enough. She adds her own note underneath. Just a short line. A good year to begin again. Weather held. Bread rose. You turn back through the older pages. Decades of Samhains, captured in handwriting that changes slowly over time. Shaky in some years, bold in others. One entry from 1983 just says, The year the chimney smoked. We moved the fire outside, still good. Another says, She came back from London just in time. We peeled apples until our hands ached. No drama, no grand storytelling, just memory, held carefully, written once a year and never edited. You ask Maeve if she reads them often. Only on this day, she replies. Then I close it again. We don't need to carry it with us. We just need to mark that it happened. She closes the ledger, ties it gently with a strip of linen and returns it to the chest. The gesture is so matter-of-fact, yet it carries more weight than any ceremony. It says, That was then. This is now. And now we begin again. Maeve sets the chest back in its place beneath the apple tree. No fanfare, no speech. Just returns it to the quiet earth, where wood and words can breathe together. The apple branches above creak gently in the breeze, as though acknowledging the ritual. Back inside, you notice something you hadn't before. A small bundle of red pages tied together with twine, resting on the shelf above the hearth. They're different from the Samhain ledger, looser, worn at the edges, scribbled in many different hands. Maeve sees you looking. Ah, those are the red pages. Not everyone wants to write in the book. You lift the top one gently. The writing is uneven, younger. It reads, I lit the fire wrong, but it still burned. That counts. Another says, Didn't find anything in my bread. Maybe that's its own kind of answer. Maeve shrugs. Some years the ledger's too formal, too quiet. So we started keeping these, more like a conversation with the year, or a note to it. You pull out a page with a drawing of a turnip wearing a cape and labelled Segurdolo. Another simply says, Don't forget how good the cider smelled when it rained. You grin. This feels more like the inside of the holiday. The parts no one prepares, but everyone remembers. The little things that slip through cracks unless you catch them gently with ink. Maeve invites you to add one. You hesitate again, but only for a moment this time. You pick up a red page and write, Wore a mossy mask, got apple juice up my nose, felt like I belonged. You add a tiny sketch of your lopsided mask in the corner, somewhere between a tree and a startled badger. Maeve reads it over your shoulder and chuckles. That'll age well. She tucks it into the bundle, then sets the pages back on the shelf. No index, no sorting. Just a loose pile of moments, waiting for next Samhain to be read again. It occurs to you then, this is what makes the season last. Not decorations, not countdowns, not photos, but remembrance, written softly enough that time can still breathe through it. Later, Maeve sets out 2 small mugs of broth and a plate of oatcakes. No one says grace. No one rehashes the year. You eat in the quiet comfort of people who know they've already said what mattered. Outside, the red leaves keep falling. A child somewhere down the lane blows into a tin whistle off-key. The hearth pops once, then settles. You glance at the shelf again, where the red pages rest beside a jar of dried lavender and a folded linen mask. There's something deeply human about it all. No one's trying to impress anyone. No one's trying to go viral or get it perfect. They're just making space for the moment to matter, and you start to understand the quiet genius of Samhain. It's not a show. It's not even a holiday. It's a yearly habit of pausing, to mark what's past, to hold what's fleeting, to whisper into the dark. I was here, and I remember. The next morning brings a kind of hush that isn't just about weather. It's a hush of after. You've reached the other side of Samhain, and though nothing looks dramatically different, everything feels shifted, like a note that's finally resolved. Maeve, as always, is up early, wrapping bundles of dried herbs with coarse twine. "We do this part every year," she says, handing you a small sprig of rosemary and thyme. "Time to bless the corners." You raise an eyebrow. "Bless them from what?" She smiles, pressing the bundle into your palm. "Not from, for." She leads you through the house, room by room. In each corner, by the doors, the windows, even the base of the stair, you pause and brush the herbs lightly against the stone or wood, saying nothing, just brushing, just noticing. "It's a gesture," Maeve explains. "You don't push bad things out. You invite the good ones to stay. This," she tells you, "was common in many old Irish homes. A Samhain custom. Quiet, domestic, gentle. No incense, no spells. Just herbs gathered from the garden, bound with intention, and passed through the hands of someone who cares enough to walk slow." You notice how every motion these past few days has echoed that same rhythm. Not fear, not urgency, just care. After the corners are finished, Maeve opens a drawer and pulls out a small tin box filled with buttons. You tilt your head. "Lost ones," she says. "All from coats and dresses that pass through here. We sew one onto a thread and hang it on the wall for the year." You help her pick one. Yours is round, wood, slightly cracked. You thread it with a length of red string and hang it from a nail by the front door. "What's it for?" you ask. "Nothing," she says, then pauses. "Or everything. It's just there. A bit of what came undone, kept with kindness. Oui." You think about that long after the task is done. How easy it is to rush past small unravellings, to discard what slips loose. But here they tie it up gently, give it a place. Not fixed, not hidden, just acknowledged. Later, while Maeve makes tea, you step out into the garden. The last of the frost has melted and the soil is soft underfoot. You see small offerings still resting at the edge. Apples, candles burned halfway down, bits of bread gone hard from the air. None of them have been cleaned away yet. There's no rush, because here, Samhain isn't a single moment. It's a seasonal hinge, slow to close, slower still to forget. You walk to the tree where you hung your apple days earlier. It's still there, slightly wrinkled now, the red string faded to rose. You leave it. Some things are meant to linger. Some things need time to finish whispering. You stand beneath the branches for a while longer, breathing in the soft, cold air and thinking not of what you need to do next, but simply how to hold still. And for the first time in a long while, that feels like enough. Back inside the cottage, the fire has quieted to low embers again. Not out, just resting. Maeve places a fresh log on top, not to force it into life, but to let it decide when it's ready. She pours 2 mugs of tea, then reaches for something from the windowsill. A small cloth ledger, different from the big one you wrote in before. Slimmer, more worn. "This one's not for the year," she says. "It's for the days that follow." She opens to the first blank page and begins to write. First frost held. 1 apple still hanging. Button tied and tea made. Good start. You ask if she writes in it daily. "Only if I remember," she says, "but especially the days after Samhain. Those are the ones that vanish if you don't catch them." She slides the notebook toward you. You pause. "What is today? Not Halloween anymore. Not a holiday. Just November. Just the beginning of the quiet." You write, "Still warm bread. The apple didn't fall. The silence outside has a heartbeat." Maeve reads it, nods once, and closes the book without comment. She places it on a shelf beneath the red pages, beside a ball of twine and a folded scarf. None of it is labelled. There's no need. This is where the year begins to breathe again. Later you help her tidy up the Samhain table. The offerings are returned to the kitchen or the compost, the candle wick trimmed for reuse. Nothing is thrown out carelessly. The final piece of barmbrack is wrapped in linen and tucked into a tin for a hard day later, as Maeve puts it. You ask if there are more rituals to come. She shrugs. There's always something, but the bones of it are done now. We've crossed the line. The line she speaks of isn't drawn anywhere, but you feel it clearly. A threshold. A gentle step from one rhythm into another. As dusk falls again, earlier still than the day before, you walk down to the garden alone. The apple you left is now surrounded by others, all slightly shrunken, some already taken by birds. A few strands of red thread dance in the wind like faded wishes. You add nothing. Just stand there. Because now, more than ever, it seems that part of Samhain's power isn't what you place, but what you leave untouched. Later, by the hearth, you sit wrapped in a wool blanket. Maeve hums quietly over her knitting. No words, just the sound of needles tapping, tea cooling, logs settling. The fire flares slightly, your log from earlier catching at last. The room glows just a little brighter, and you think, this is what survives after the festival ends. Not noise, not spectacle, just rhythm, and warmth, and the soft discipline of tending to time. Samhain may be done, but the echo continues, fading not into silence, but into stillness with memory. And for tonight, that's more than enough. The days after Samhain settle into a rhythm so natural you hardly notice it happening. The house becomes quieter, the chores slow, the urgency of harvest is gone, and what remains is something more reflective, like the countryside is pausing between breaths. One evening, as the mist rolls in low over the fields, Maeve pulls on her shawl and says, "It's a good night for the stories." You smile, assuming she means the usual ones around the fire. But she doesn't head for the hearth. Instead, she lights a lantern and leads you up the slope behind the cottage. The stars are hidden by clouds, but the path is familiar by now. You follow the bend past the standing stones and turn toward the grove, where the wind always seems to rustle a little differently. She stops at a fallen tree trunk, mossy and worn flat by time. This, she says, was where the young ones would gather for the courage circle. The name is charming, a little dramatic, but you can tell by her tone it was taken seriously. On Samhain night, she says, the young folk, usually those around 14 or 15, would come up here after the meal. No parents, no older siblings, just them, and one small lantern. You sit beside her, she sets the lantern on the trunk. Its flame flickers, the light barely reaching past your knees. It wasn't a rite of passage exactly, but it was a kind of checkpoint, she continues. Each year you had to share something true, something you feared, or something you hoped for. Not a game, not a test, just a place to speak without interruption and to be heard without reply. Maeve closes her eyes for a moment. It was the only night some of us told the truth out loud. You picture a circle of awkward teenagers, bundled in oversized coats, their knees knocking from cold or nerves, sharing quiet confessions in the dark, not knowing what to say, but needing to say something. Maeve chuckles softly. I once said I was afraid of growing up and turning into my aunt with a screechy laugh. Everyone swore they wouldn't tell. They didn't. You laugh too, but you feel the weight of it. The realness of speaking something aloud, even just once, that no one's allowed to fix. You ask if they still do it. Not every year, she says, but some still come. Leave notes, tie ribbons, whisper to the dark. That's enough. She pulls from her pocket a folded bit of paper, edges softened by handling. Without unfolding it, she tucks it into the crook of the tree. You realise it's not about who hears it. It's about letting it live somewhere else. And suddenly, you feel like you want to leave something too. Maeve stands, brushes moss from her skirt and says, "We don't always need someone to witness it. Just a place to put it down. As you walk back in silence, you understand the strange wisdom of this old village custom. Not every ritual needs an audience. Not every truth needs a solution. Some just need space. And what Samhain offers, perhaps more than anything, is the grace of anonymous honesty." Back at the cottage, Maeve heads for the stove to warm a bit of cider while you drift toward the hearth. The fire's gone low again, like it's listening. You sit in the soft chair, fingers curled around your sleeves, still holding the shape of what you almost set up at the courage circle, but didn't. Maeve returns with 2 mugs and settles in beside you, but neither of you speak right away. The silence feels full, not empty, like a pause between verses of an old song. After a few sips, she says, "Not every fear needs naming, but when it's ready, it'll know." You don't know if she's talking about you. Maybe she doesn't either, but the timing is perfect. You ask her why the courage circle happens after Samhain night, not during the centre of the celebration. "Because the work is done," she says. "The fire's lit, the bread is shared, the tokens have spoken. Once the outer rituals are quiet, the inner ones can speak." And it clicks. Samhain isn't just about what you do, it's about what follows after. The slow processing, the unspooling, the quiet letting go. Maeve picks up a bit of wool and begins to spin it into thread with a small spindle, her hands moving in that steady rhythm that seems woven into her bones. She talks about her own first time at the courage circle, how she almost didn't go, how her voice shook, how no one laughed. It was the silence that made it feel safe. No one was waiting to correct or explain. You realise now, the rituals surrounding Samhain aren't meant to scare. They're meant to hold space for transition, hold space for feelings too strange to name, hold space for people on the edge of becoming. You think of the child's note in the red pages. "I lit the fire wrong, but it still burned." You think of your own hands, cold on the apple, fumbling the spoon toss, giggling into a mask made of moss. None of it was perfect, and none of it had to be. Maeve finishes spinning her thread and winds it around a small twig. She sets it beside the red pages and leans back, eyes closed. You glance again toward the door, where your apple still hangs by its string, quietly weathering in the wind. Maybe you'll write something later. Maybe you won't. But you know now, the courage isn't in speaking. It's in giving yourself permission to listen to the words you haven't found yet. And Samhain, in its slow and silent way, gives you that permission. Not as an audience, not as a judge, but as a gentle place to pause, to reflect, and to let your next year begin. Not with answers, but with truth-shaped questions. And for now, that is more than enough. It's just past dusk when Maeve wraps a wool scarf around her shoulders and says, "We'll want to be up at the ridge before full dark." Her voice carries that same gentle certainty you've come to associate with Samhain. Not hurried, not commanding, just steady, like a river that knows where it's going. You ask what's happening at the ridge. She only replies, "The bonfire." You blink. "I thought we did that already." She smiles. "That was the village fire. This one's the hill fire. It's older, quieter, less about flame, more about closure." You follow her up the slope behind the cottages, lanterns swinging gently at your side. Others are already headed the same way, figures spaced out like stars, each walking at their own pace. There's no central call, no starting time, just understanding. As you climb, the ridge opens up to a high, wind-swept field ringed with stone and scrub. In the centre is a low, compact pile of dry branches, carefully arranged. No fuel, no accelerants, just the kind of brush that burns hot and fast, then fades. A man you recognise from the Apple games kneels near the pile, flint in hand. No matches, no lighter, just the same deliberate spark from stone and steel you saw used days earlier. Maeve whispers, "They say the final fire shouldn't be rushed. If it takes a while to catch, that's the year asking for patience." Tonight the flame hesitates. The first few sparks die in the wind. People gather at a respectful distance, not crowding or commenting, just watching, just waiting. And then, quietly, it catches. One small flame curls upward, golden and sure, and the branches take it eagerly. Within minutes the fire is alive, not roaring, not wild, just steady. No one cheers. Instead they step forward in small groups, each tossing in something. A dried flower, a bundle of herb stalks, a folded scrap of linen. You realise these are personal offerings, items kept from the year just past. Nothing dramatic, Nothing sacred, just physical representations of things ready to be released. Maeve holds out a small cloth bundle to you. Inside is a broken button, a pebble from the old road, and a few dried leaves. Only if it feels right, she says. You hesitate, then step forward and place it gently into the fire. It blackens, curls, and disappears without a sound. No announcement, no reward, but something inside you feels lighter. Not gone, but no longer clenched. Others add their own tokens. A girl throws in a scrap of old schoolwork. A man presses a piece of apple skin into the embers and watches until it vanishes. There's no rule to what you burn, only that it's something you're ready to set down. The flames glow higher for a while, then begin to ebb. No one adds more wood. The point isn't to keep it alive, it's to let it complete. The fire burns low, then lower still, until it's nothing more than red-orange threads winding through a bed of ash. No one speaks. No one moves to break the silence. The wind has picked up slightly at the ridge, rustling cloaks and scarves, yet no one turns to leave. Because this is the part that matters, not the burning, the after. Maeve stands beside you, her face soft in the flickering dark. This is when we listen. You ask, to what? She thinks for a moment, to whatever hasn't been said yet. You look out over the glowing coals. They pulse like a slow heartbeat, sending occasional sparks upward into the night. Some vanish before they rise above the stone ring. Others drift further, caught in the wind, gone without trace. You don't know what exactly you're listening for, but something in the stillness invites you to try. Not with your ears, but with attention, with presence. A man steps forward and scatters dry herbs over the embers, rosemary maybe, or mugwort. The fire hisses once, not in protest, but like a quiet sigh. The scent rises warm and earthy. It smells like memory. Maeve leans toward you. We used to write things down on bits of cloth, things we couldn't say to people still living, not out of anger, just things that needed to be let go. You nod, feeling the pull of it in your chest. All the thoughts we carry around, sometimes for years, unsure where they belong, and here, for just one night, there's a place to set them down. One woman places a small piece of cracked pottery into the edge of the embers. Another lays a broken pencil, worn and used, its meaning known only to her. You don't need to understand what each object means, you only need to witness the release of it. Someone begins to hum. It's not a song, really, just a low, rising tone, steady and slow, like breath turned into music. Another voice joins, then another. It doesn't swell. It doesn't become a chorus. It stays soft, grounded, like the ridge itself is singing quietly under the stars. You stand there longer than you expect to. You don't remember how long. The fire grows darker, cooler. At some point, Maeve squeezes your arm gently and begins walking back down the path. No one announces that it's time to go. Everyone just knows. As you walk, your feet crunch against the frost-hardened ground. The air feels lighter now, not warm but forgiving. Back at the cottage, the hearth fire is still burning. A simple fire. A home fire. And somehow it feels different than the one you lit days ago. Not because it changed, but because you have. You sit down across from it, wrap your fingers around a warm mug and say nothing. Because tonight didn't need words. It needed closure. It needed embers. It needed permission to end something, and let it stay ended. And in the soft crackle of the fire and the wind brushing against the window panes, and the red thread still hanging quietly by the door, you feel it. The new year has room now, because you finally made space. The morning after the ridge fire is the coldest yet. You wake to a layer of frost so thick it looks like snow, glinting on the stone walls, softening the garden beds, drawing fine white veins across the windows. The world outside is hushed and silver. Inside, the hearth glows steadily. It feels like it's holding the memory of all the fires that came before. Maeve is already in the kitchen, spooning something into small jars. Stewed apples, she says. Final batch. You join her, helping wipe the rims and tie scraps of cloth over the lids with bits of string. Each jar gets a label, not a date, but a phrase. First frost, Ridgefire night. The year opened quietly. She notices you reading. Better than numbers. I like to taste memory, not math. Once the jars are done, she sets them on the shelf beside others from years past. You see more of her handwritten labels. Cold sun, mask of leaves, the spoon landed up. You smile. Even now, the events of Samhain aren't fading. They're simply settling, not disappearing, just embedding themselves in small acts. A jar, a page, a button on the wall. Later, Maeve invites you to help with one last tradition. You walk down to the edge of the orchard where a small wooden shed leans slightly under the weight of the moss on its roof. Inside is a bundle of long red fabric strips. We tie them today, she says, before the year gets too loud again. You help her knot one to the fence near the garden. It flutters in the wind, bright and strange, like a flame made still. Each ribbon gets tied in a place that mattered during Samhain, one by the standing stones, another near the ridge path, one outside the door where the bread offering sat. They aren't labelled. They aren't explained. They just mark. You ask what they're for. They're reminders, Maeve says. Not to hold on to what's over, but to carry the shape of it into what comes next. You tie your own ribbon to the apple tree, right where the red string from your Samhain apple still hangs. The old apple is now soft and wrinkled, clinging stubbornly to its branch. I'll leave that one up till the wind says it's done, she says. You step back and see the red fabric catching the light between bare branches. It doesn't feel ceremonial. It feels useful, like a visual echo of something you lived and might live again next year. As you walk back toward the house, Maeve tells you that these ribbons will fade. The wind will fray them. The rain will mute them. Some will fall away entirely. And that's the point, she says. We don't preserve the past to keep it pristine. We do it so we remember how it felt, just long enough to let it shape the future. And you understand, this is the true closing of Samhain, not with fire, not with food, but with threads left behind to gently tug at your memory when spring returns. That afternoon, the wind picks up and carries with it the unmistakable shift of the season. No longer the lingering warmth of autumn, but the first quiet whisper of winter. Inside, the windows fog gently from the steam of boiling water. Maeve is boiling fabric, red wool scraps and faded ribbon softening them for storage. She moves without urgency, her motion steady, practiced. You're helping her sort a drawer full of bits and pieces, dried rose hips, acorn caps, string ends, broken clothespins, and buttons with no matches. It looks like a drawer of junk until you recognise a pattern. Every item once marked something. A moment, a game, a whisper of memory. You ask why she keeps them. Because things get loud again, she says. The world starts moving fast and it's easy to forget what we meant to carry. She wraps the boiled fabric and places it in a chest lined with lavender and rosemary. These will rest until next Samhain, not locked away, just sleeping. You realise that the festival you've just lived through isn't simply a holiday. It's a structure, a way to house memory so it doesn't get blown away when the days speed up again. Maeve returns the red pages to their spot, stacking them gently next to the Samhain ledger and a tiny cloth pouch of dried apple peel. She adds one last item, the lopsided mask you made, its moss now brittle and faded. She doesn't discard it. She keeps it. You ask, even the mask? She laughs softly. Especially the mask. It reminds us not to take ourselves too seriously, even when the season does. The final act before winter sets in is almost too simple. Maeve brings out a broom, bristles worn smooth, and sweeps the threshold of the cottage. Not the floor, not the hearth. Just the narrow stone step between the outside world and the home. One sweep outward, one sweep inward. Out with what's done, in with what's needed. You take a turn. The broom is light in your hands, but the gesture carries weight. Like saying goodbye without grief. Like welcoming without demand. And then, that's it. There's no bell, No final toast, no closing line, just a slow returning to ordinary time. You make tea, you sit quietly. Maeve knits. The day darkens early. The house, now stripped of offerings and ribbons and ritual, feels no less meaningful. In fact, it feels more. Like all the energy poured into Samian has soaked into the walls, and in you too. You step outside one last time before bed. The red ribbons catch the wind. Some are already starting to twist and fade. You find this comforting. Not everything that matters needs to last forever. It only needs to matter when it matters. You inhale deeply, the air crisp, pine-scented, edged with coming frost. And in your chest is something you didn't expect to feel so strongly. Readiness. Not for a party, not for celebration, but for what comes after. Because Samhain didn't give you answers. It gave you rhythm, a thread, a map of how to step forward with memory, not baggage. And in the quiet of the year's dark half, that's more than enough to light your way. The day after the red ribbons are tied, Maeve suggests a walk, not down the old road this time, but across the fields toward the bog. It's not a dramatic place, just a low, flat expanse of moss, reeds and shallow pools, stretching like a green quilt beneath a sky heavy with clouds. But Maeve insists this is the final path worth taking. The bog keeps the quiet, she says, and the quiet keeps the memory. You bundle up, boots thick against the soft ground, and follow her along a worn path between the rushes. She carries nothing with her. No basket, no bundle, just a slow pace and a far-off gaze. As you walk, she tells you how the bog was once a place of deep ritual, not sacrifice, not fear, but preservation. In the old days, we placed what mattered in the bog so it would stay. The land here doesn't rot things, it remembers them. She tells you how butter, tools, wooden bowls, and even finely woven cloth were buried here. Not thrown away, but gifted, entrusted. And when some of them were uncovered centuries later, they were still whole. They didn't call it waste, she says. They called it keeping what we couldn't carry. You arrive at a small raised island in the middle of the bog, barely more than a lump of earth surrounded by reeds. A single ancient tree leans sideways from the centre, its bark hollowed and paper thin. Beneath it sits a smooth stone. Maeve kneels. This was where people came to place the things they wanted remembered, not displayed. You look around and see small signs, an old iron nail rusted into the soil, a bit of blue thread tied to a reed, a wooden spoon half sunk in the mud. Nothing flashy, no plaque. Just soft offerings to time itself. Maeve pulls from her pocket a folded piece of cloth. She presses it into the damp moss with care. I used to bring my grandmother here, she says. She'd leave behind one thread from her spinning. Said it helped the next year begin without knots. You sit beside her. There's nothing in your pocket, nothing on your person. But somehow, your hands feel full. You think of all the things you've carried quietly. Regrets too small to name, moments too blurry to sort, questions you never quite asked. And maybe that's what this place is for. Not ceremony, not closure, but rest. A place to leave the weight of what you've outgrown without needing to cut it loose. Just place it down. Let the bog hold it. You reach into your coat and pull out the button Maeve gave you days ago, the one tied to red thread and hung by the door. It's not yours exactly, but it was part of your Samhain, and maybe now it belongs here. You press it gently into the moss beside Maeve's cloth. It sinks slightly, then stops, held in that soft, endless grip of peat and time. The wind moves the reeds in a hush. The tree creaks gently. The world does not applaud, and that's how you know it worked. You sit for a long time on the mossy ground beside Maeve, listening, not for answers, but for the kind of silence that teaches you how to be still. The bog doesn't speak. It doesn't whisper secrets or echo back your thoughts. It just holds. That's its power. In a world obsessed with movement and noise, this place is an act of resistance, a pocket of stillness where nothing rushes and nothing begs to be noticed. Maeve brushes her hands on her cloak and stands slowly. Ready? You nod, though a part of you wants to stay longer, not to do anything, just to exist in a space where existing is enough. As you walk back across the field, your boots leave shallow prints in the spongy earth. The path behind you fades quickly. Already the moss is reclaiming its shape. It's like you were never there, and yet something of you remains. That's the secret of Samhain, you realise. It's not about dramatic endings or loud beginnings. It's about layering. Layer upon layer of quiet rituals stitched into the land, into the hearth, into the body. None of them flashy, none of them obvious, but each one anchoring you a little more deeply to the rhythms that came before and will come again. Back at the cottage, Maeve hangs up her cloak and sets a kettle on the hob. No words are needed. The clink of the pot lid, the shuffle of her boots by the door, these are part of the rhythm now. You look around and notice how much has changed, and how much has stayed the same. The red ribbons flutter outside, the hearth still glows, but the offerings are gone. The apple musks have been boxed away. The bread plates cleared. It's not emptiness, it's readiness. Maeve pours 2 mugs of tea and sets them on the table. Then she reaches into a drawer and pulls out a small folded square of thick paper. I usually do this after the bog, she says, handing it to you. A closing page. You unfold it to find a simple prompt. 3 things to carry forward, 3 things to leave behind. No pressure, no expectation. Just the gentle suggestion of reflection. You take the pencil she offers and sit quietly with it. You write slowly, not to be perfect, but to be honest. To carry forward the rhythm of walking without purpose, the feeling of a fire you don't need to tend, the sound of stillness with someone beside you. To leave behind the pressure to make it meaningful, the fear of forgetting, that one regret you never named. You fold the paper and set it by the hearth. Maeve doesn't ask to read it. She just nods, satisfied. You'll be surprised how helpful that little act is, she says. By February you'll be chasing deadlines and dropping spoons again. But some part of you will remember this. And she's right. Because Samhain isn't designed to last forever. It's meant to be gentle, brief, and quietly potent. Like a fire that burns just long enough to warm your bones, and then let you go. The wind howls gently outside, tugging at the roof. Rain begins to tap at the windows, and inside, all is calm. A few days pass. Samhain fades, not dramatically, but the way mist lifts from the grass when the sun finally shows itself. Quietly, naturally. You've returned to routines, sweeping the hearth, refilling the kettle, reading the same page of an old book 3 times before realizing you've already read it. Life resumes, but it feels slightly softer, as if it's been sanded down by all that stillness. Maeve, of course, is already looking ahead. The cattle need checking, she says one morning. Up at the upper pastures, you raise an eyebrow. We're still doing cattle rounds after Samhain, she laughs. Especially after Samhain. They don't feed themselves just because the veil's lifted. So you set off, boots heavy with dew and breath puffing out in little clouds. The climb is longer than you remember, or maybe it's just that your muscles are still tuned to slow walks and bog sitting. The landscape has changed again, more brittle, more exposed. The trees have shed nearly everything now, and what remains are bones and bark and stubbornness. At the ridge the cattle stand clustered and content, their breath rising in soft bursts. Maeve walks among them, murmuring softly, checking for limps, inspecting hooves. You watch from a stone ledge nearby, taking in the spread of land below, the bog in the distance, the garden patch behind the cottage, the path you followed to the standing stones, all of it visible now in the pale morning light. And you realise something. Samhain wasn't a break from the world. It was a mirror of it. All those rituals, the bread, the threads, the red pages, they weren't escapes. They were ways to see things clearly, to notice again. Maeve finishes her rounds and joins you, brushing hay off her cloak. This, she says, gesturing to the cattle and the land and the pale gold light, is what we're doing it for. You nod. Not because you fully understand, but because something in you recognises it. She continues. The old ways weren't just about seasons or gods or what happens after we die. They were about what happens when we pay attention, when we make meaning with our hands and our time. You sit quietly beside her. The sky opens just a little, revealing a soft blue ribbon on the horizon. And it strikes you that even now, even days after the fire, after the bog, after the bread offerings, there's a rhythm under everything. Not loud, not demanding, but there, like a faint drumbeat just beneath the frost. You rise to your feet and follow Maeve down the path again. There's a comfort in walking familiar routes with new eyes. The rocks are the same, so is the mud. But your feet feel steadier now, and at the edge of the path, nestled under a half-bare hedge, you spot something red. One of the Samhain ribbons, carried by the wind, caught gently in the brambles. You reach to untangle it, and instead leave it there, because maybe it's meant to drift a little longer. The descent from the ridge is slower, not because your legs are tired, but because neither of you seems in a rush. Maeve walks a little behind this time, letting the wind move her cloak, her eyes on the hedge-lined trail as if she's looking for something. Not an object, but a feeling. Back at the cottage, the sky's already dimming again. These short days will only shrink more. Maeve lights the hearth with a practiced flick of straw and flint. You kneel to feed it a small log and feel that same soft heat wrap around your hands. Then, without preamble, she says, "Do you know what the cows remind me of?" You shake your head. Samhain itself. Everyone talks about the glamour, the old gods, the spirits, the fire festivals. But at the heart of it, it was always about livelihood, herds, food, survival, making it through the cold. She hands you a small bundle wrapped in linen. Inside is a tiny wedge of hard cheese, a dried apple slice, and a heel of oat cake. A sampler of the harvest, tucked away after the feast. I keep one for every Samhain. It's my way of remembering what really mattered. Not what glowed or danced, but what fed us. You take a bite. The cheese is sharp, the apple leathery, the oatcake rough on your tongue, and yet it's deeply satisfying. Honest food, stored carefully. The opposite of dramatic, but more nourishing than you expected. And that's when it hits you. All of it, the bog walk, the red strings, the cattle check, is designed not to entertain, but to anchor. These are rituals not for spectacle, but for remembering what keeps us upright when the days grow dark. Maeve adds a few more logs to the fire, then pulls out the old ledger. "I want you to add a page," she says. "Not a red one, a black one." She slides you a sheet of thick paper, soft as cloth, and a white chalk pencil. "What do I write?" "Nothing," she says, smiling. "Not this time." You pause, then with a bit of hesitation, draw a single image, a ribbon caught in a hedge. No words, no labels, just the image that lingers from earlier. She peeks at it, nods. "Good, that one's yours now." And just like that, the Samhain ledger becomes a little fuller, not with drama or revelations, but with a quiet gesture, like leaving a pebble on a trail for the next person to find. Later that night, as the wind scratches gently at the shutters and the hearth dims to an orange whisper, Maeve brings out 2 mugs of something warm and unfamiliar. "Meadowsweet," she says. "It soothes the bones." You sip it slowly. The taste is earthy, floral, with a faint bitter twist at the end. Like summer remembering winter is coming. And as you drink, you realise that Samhain isn't something you finished. It's something that keeps echoing, in the meals, in the ledgers, in the walks through mud and wind. The festival may be over, but the shape it carved into your days? That will stay a while longer. It begins with a question. One grey morning, while helping Maeve bundle kindling by the back shed, you ask something that's been sitting in your chest since the bog walk. How did it all begin? I mean, Samhain. Why this time of year? Why the rituals, the food, the ribbons? Maeve doesn't answer right away. She finishes tying the bundle with a rough loop of twine, then gestures for you to follow. "Come," she says. "I'll show you the oldest place I know." You trail her along a narrow track behind the cottage, where thorny hedges give way to open moor. The sky hangs low and heavy, the light flat and silver. After about 20 minutes you see it, a ring of squat stones, half sunken into the earth, cloaked in moss and silence. A stone circle, not the dramatic, towering kind from the postcards. This one's modest, weathered, and yet it feels ancient in your bones, as if the wind itself turns solemn when it moves through here. Maeve doesn't speak until you've both stepped into the circle. This, she says, was never about ghosts, or ghouls, or tricks. She runs a hand along one of the stones. It was about marking the hinge of the year. You blink. The hinge? She nods. This is the turning point. The place where the bright half ends and the dark half begins. A threshold. And people, long before books or calendars, felt it. She kneels and begins clearing moss from a flat stone at the circle's edge. Beneath it is a carved groove, barely visible. This one lines up with the setting sun on Samhain. Only once a year does it strike through here, just as the day slips into night. You stare at it, imagining the sun as it once was, sliding low behind hills now softened with time. Rituals came later, Maeve says, but the noticing came first. People saw how animals changed, how the wind shifted, how even their own dreams grew stranger. They didn't need a priest to tell them. The land spoke, and so, she explains, they marked it, not with speeches or fanfare, but with gatherings, shared meals, offerings, observances so ordinary they barely look like ceremony at all. Bread left at the gate, embers stirred at dusk, threads tied in quiet corners of the home. Samhain wasn't about spectacle, it was about alignment, getting back in rhythm with what was already happening around them, not changing the world, but adjusting themselves to it, so they wouldn't stumble into winter blind and unready. You kneel beside Maeve, hands pressed into the soft, cold earth. It's not haunted, it's not magic, and yet it feels sacred, the kind of sacred that has nothing to prove. She smiles gently. People always think Samhain is about endings, but really it's about listening. You listen to the wind, to the stillness between your breaths, to the faint echo of something older than memory, and for a moment it all feels so clear. You stay in the circle longer than you meant to, tracing your fingers over the worn stones, letting their cool surface remind you just how many winters they've seen. There are no signs, no fences, no tourist markers, just the quiet confidence of a place that never needed to be explained. Maeve doesn't rush you. She walks the perimeter slowly, tapping each stone in a silent count, then steps back into the centre with a small crooked smile. Every village had a place like this, she says. Not always circles, sometimes a well, or a thorn tree, or even just a hollow in the hills, but always somewhere people could gather when the world was changing. She pulls from her pocket a bit of charcoal and a folded bit of paper. She kneels and begins sketching the stones. Not carefully, just loosely. The way someone records something not to publish it, but to remember how it felt. You sit beside her, still caught in her earlier words, listening. That's what this all keeps circling back to, isn't it? Not conjuring or controlling, but tuning in. You ask, "So when did all the costumes and candy come in?" She chuckles. Much, much later, and mostly not here. She explains that in parts of Ireland children did dress up, centuries ago even, but not to be spooky. They wore ragged clothes, turned them inside out, and smeared ash on their faces to confuse bad luck or wandering spirits. It wasn't about fear, it was about trickery for protection, turning mischief into a shield. And the door-to-door traditions? They weren't always about sweets. It used to be bits of bread, apples or coins, offered in exchange for rhymes or blessings. Sometimes even small chores or kind words earned a token. But we didn't dress as monsters, she adds. We dressed as inversion. The world was turning on its head, and so did we. She rises and dusts off her knees. Modern Samhain got tangled with other things over time. All Saints' Day, Guy Fawkes, American Halloween. It's all threads in the same cloth now. And suddenly that makes sense. What you've been experiencing here, the bread, the red pages, the cattle, the bog, it is Halloween, just stripped of the plastic and the neon, still breathing in its native soil. You walk back from the stone circle in a slow hush, both of you quieter now, each step feeling a little more anchored. Back at the cottage, Maeve lights a beeswax candle and places it in the window. "For anyone still walking home," she says simply. You watch the tiny flame flicker in the glass. It's not dramatic, it's not spooky, but it's enough. You suddenly understand why people once believed this was the true start of the year. Because something about it does feel like a beginning. Not with trumpets or fireworks, but with a door gently opening, a path clearing ahead, and the soft whisper of the land saying, "Welcome back." By now you've slipped into the rhythm of Maeve's world so fully that you don't notice how different it is from the one you came from, until you take a walk into the nearby village. It's a tiny place, a church, a crumbling wall, 2 pubs, and a shop that sells more peat than produce. But something about it today feels festive, like the air is holding its breath, waiting. You step into the shop for a loaf of bread and find the counter draped in old linen embroidered with autumn leaves. There's a bundle of dried wheat tied with red string above the door. The woman behind the counter nods at you with a knowing smile. "You're staying with Maeve, aren't you?" she asks. You nod, surprised. "Thought so. She's the only one still doing it properly. You don't ask what it is. You already know." Back on the street, children run past wearing mismatched shawls and oversized caps. No skeleton masks. No zombies. Just bundles of cloth and smudged cheeks. They're not trying to be scary. They're trying to be strange, to look like something out of place. Inversion, just like Maeve said. A boy calls out a rhyme in Irish that you don't understand, but the rhythm of it is sweet and old. A woman drops a small apple into his cloth sack and nods. No one claps or takes a photo. It's not performance. It's just what you do. You watch them for a while before continuing down the lane. At the far end of the village, beyond the last cottage, there's a field with a single ancient hawthorn tree at its centre. Someone has tied bits of cloth, red and white, to its branches. A clootie tree. Each scrap holds a silent wish, a quiet sorrow, a whispered thanks. Some are nearly disintegrated, faded from last year's wind and rain. Others are fresh, knotted tightly. You pull a thread from your coat hem, just a fray, barely noticeable, and tie it gently to a low branch. No wish spoken aloud, just the act itself, like adding your voice to a choir that's been singing for centuries. On the walk back to Maeve's, the wind picks up. Leaves skitter across the road like whispers. You realise Samhain isn't just a night. It's a season. A thin thread that stretches from the harvest fields to the hearth, from the stone circles to the village square, and everyone, in their own way, is holding it. When you return to Maeve's cottage, the kettle is already on. Steam rises from the spout like an invitation, and Maeve is seated at the table with something you haven't seen before. A small tin box, dented and worn, its lid covered in faded Celtic knots. She gestures for you to sit. "I thought you might like to see how it changes," she says. You open the tin, and inside are scraps. Old thread spools, candle ends, buttons, tiny paper charms folded tightly. A worn photograph of a woman in a wool cloak. A pressed piece of bog myrtle. Bits and pieces that seem random until you realise they aren't. They're leftovers from Samhain's past. "They don't last," she explains. "The fires go out, the bread is eaten, but you always keep a trace, something that reminds you the year truly turned." You take out the pressed bog myrtle, and it smells faintly herbal, like earth and smoke. You imagine her gathering it decades ago, just as the air turned cold, maybe after her own walk to the bog. "Some people plant garlic on Samhain," she continues, stirring the kettle. "Not because it grows fast, because it sleeps all winter underground, then comes back." You smile. The symbolism isn't lost on you. Seeds planted in silence, changes made in stillness. She pours you both a mug of something thick and dark, barley tea with a hint of molasses, and reaches for a small wooden box tucked behind a pile of books. Inside are slips of paper. Not red this time, not black, just plain. "Write what you're leaving behind," she says. You hesitate. Does it have to be something big? She shakes her head. Could be anything. A habit, a fear, even a thought. So you write, slowly, then fold the paper once, twice, and place it in the box. Maeve doesn't ask what it says. She simply places it beside the fire. You both sit in a long, quiet pause, sipping your tea, listening to the pop of the logs and the soft scratch of wind outside the windows. Eventually she breaks the silence. You know, Samhain was never about saying goodbye forever, just recognising the shift. You nod. The village children, the hawthorn tree, the groove in the stone circle, all of it was part of the same rhythm. A season not of fear, but of release. Not an ending, but a soft place to place what no longer fits. Later, as you prepare for bed, you glance back at the fire. The box is still there, resting on the stone ledge, your folded paper safe inside. You think about what it holds, not just your note, but years of letting go, years of quiet goodbyes. And just before you slip under the covers, you hear it again. That faint, steady rhythm beneath it all. Samhain breathing its way forward. Your final morning in the Irish countryside arrives not with fanfare, but with stillness. The wind has died. The trees, stripped bare by the recent storm, stand motionless like quiet sentinels. Even the crows are subdued today, their calls softened as if the world knows not to speak too loudly. Maeve meets you by the hearth, 2 mugs of tea in hand, one for you, one for her, and she doesn't say good morning. Just a small nod, a gesture that says, yes. We've reached the other side. She sets down a small cloth pouch on the table. This is yours, she says. Inside are 3 things. A sprig of dried rowan, a stub of red thread, and a scrap of paper with your own handwriting, the note you thought she'd burned. You'll need it next year, she says matter-of-factly. You blink. But I thought we let it go. She smiles. We did, but reminders help. There's no sentimentality in her voice, no dramatic weight, just the plain truth that the wheel always turns, and when it does, a bit of continuity is not a burden, but a kindness. You help her with the morning rounds, no longer needing instruction. You know which gate sticks, which hen always strays, which path to take to the woodpile that won't sink your boots in mud. Everything that was foreign has now settled into something familiar. At the edge of the field, Maeve pauses beside the old fence post and holds out her hand. She presses a small copper coin into your palm. For the road, she says. It's not an antique, not enchanted. Just an old Irish penny, smooth and worn, the kind you'd pass without notice. But in her hand, it feels like something more. In the old days, she says, people never left without offering or receiving a coin, not for value, for passage, for memory. The sun begins to climb now, low and gold, casting long shadows across the frost-silvered grass. You feel its warmth on your cheeks and realise how much your body has adjusted to the cold. You haven't checked your phone in days. You don't even know what day it is, which feels just right. Back at the cottage, Maeve gives you a satchel of oatcakes and apples, for the journey, she says, and opens the ledger one last time. You expect her to write something. Instead, she pulls out one of the red pages and hands it to you. Yours to keep, everyone gets one. You stare at it, then carefully tuck it between the pages of your notebook. It doesn't mean you'll remember everything, she says, but it means you won't forget it all either. And that's enough. The time to leave comes like dusk creeping over the fields, quiet, certain, and unhurried. You sling the satchel over your shoulder, give Maeve one last nod. A hug would feel too loud for this place, and step out into the morning mist. As your boots crunch along the gravel path, you turn once to see the cottage one final time. The window is fogged from within, candle still glowing faintly behind the glass, and there she is, Maeve, framed in the doorway, small and steady, as if she's always been there and always will be. You wave. She doesn't wave back, just lifts her cup in silent farewell, then disappears into the light. You don't cry, not because it isn't emotional, but because Samhain doesn't ask for tears. It asks for stillness, for noticing, for planting something quietly inside yourself that might bloom later. You walk back through the village. The scraps still dance from the hawthorn. The children's chalk drawings are fading on the stones. A ribbon from someone's costume lies curled by a gate like a shed skin. Everything remains, and everything shifts. You cross the bridge out of town and find a small flat rock at the side of the lane. You sit, unwrap one of the oatcakes, and let the cool air settle around you like a woolen shawl. And you remember. You remember the clatter of hooves on Samhain Eve, the smell of peat smoke and barley tea, the soft hum of the red ledger pages turning beneath Maeve's hands, the string tied around the cow's tail, the ember placed gently into the hearth, the butter dish left outside the door, just in case. You remember the stories, the silences, the space between things. You remember that Halloween wasn't invented, it unfolded. Not in a single night, but over generations of quiet repetition, of households that watched the wind and responded, of people who turned toward the dark not with fear, but with food, fire and folk songs. And you realise something else. Samhain didn't survive because people believed in ghosts. It survived because it made sense. It matched the way the land felt, the way the days shortened, the way people needed one another when the light grew thin. You pick up a small stone and tuck it in your pocket. Just one. Not because it's magic, but because it came from this place, and you came from this moment. When you finally rise and take the path toward wherever home is now, you do so not with a heart heavy from goodbye, but with one quietly ready. Because the veil wasn't just between the living and the dead, it was between forgetting and remembering. And now you remember. So now, here you are, tucked in bed, maybe with a blanket wrapped tight. The room a little dim, your thoughts a little softer. You've wandered fields in the Irish countryside. You've watched bread rise slowly over the fire. You've listened to stories not shouted but whispered, because the best ones always are. And what a strange and lovely thing it is to know that Halloween, the one we dress up for, light up for, and sometimes spook ourselves silly for, began with moments so small they could almost be missed. A red ribbon tied to a tree, a cow led home just before the light fades, a slice of bread left on the step, not because someone might take it, but because you never knew who might be walking by. That's what tradition really is, isn't it? Tiny gestures, repeated just enough to outlive their makers, held by memory, not mandate. You don't need to travel to feel it. The rhythm is still there, whenever the wind shifts, whenever you notice the cold returning, whenever you take a breath and pause before the season turns again. So rest easy. Let your thoughts drift like mist over the fields. Let the candle in the window burn low, and when you wake, the year will have turned,